Hi guys, my name's Madhava. I work at Cementis with Elmar. This is my first talk, so go hard on me and then that way it'll be funnier later. Okay. Giving back with GitHub, putting the open source back in iOS. Why am I giving this talk? Conversation went sort of like this. Elmar, hey, check out this thing I made, user defaults. Me, WTF is this? No, don't get it. Elmar tries to explain. All I heard was blah, 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 generics, blah, 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 type safety, blah, 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 monad flat map. I'm like, what? So it was a little over my head. I've started to understand it, but it's very impressive. And then he said, let's open source it. So I was like, sweet. That sounds like a cool idea. What's the talk about? Well, I want to talk about why GitHub's the perfect place to open source code. I mean, it seems like an obvious thing, but actually there's some pretty good reasons. What makes a good iOS GitHub repo? Multi-platform support, because when you make something on GitHub, you want other people to be able to use it in ways you probably didn't expect. Testing with Travis CI. Package manager support, and just some finishing touches to make things look cool. So, GitHub's kind of the center of the open source world. There's frameworks on there, there's libraries, tons of examples. They've got wikis and issues. You can do pull requests. In fact, on the Palau defaults GitHub page, we've already had a few pull requests that have been merged, and there's one pending when those tests get fixed. Gists, they're super cool. There's APIs. It's pretty much always up. If you've caught GitHub down, then lucky you. They use the best VCS, which everyone knows is Git, so that's awesome too. And there's a massive community, and even Apple's using it. As you may know, Swift is being developed in the open on GitHub, so get in and get involved. So, reasons to git commit to the GitHub community. Maybe you thought of a cool feature for one of your favorite repos, and you could just get in there and add it, why not? Maybe you found a bug in someone else's code and you want to rub it in or fix it. That's what you should be doing. You wrote a cool script one time and you've automated something that's really difficult, but maybe you should put it up there so someone else's life isn't so difficult. And also, Git karma. Did you know that every time you git pull without git pushing, puppies die? It's true. So git commit, public code, it makes you a better programmer. You may also want your profile to suck less. All those little green dots down there, that's when it's a public repo. I've obviously got tons of private stuff, doesn't show up, so you've got to commit open source code to do that. Developing on iOS with GitHub is really awesome. There's a whole flow to it, really. If you're not familiar with it, some people have the luxury of using it with the enterprise in proper business. Most of us obviously here probably work in a situation where it's not open source. But there are similar things like GitLab. But the whole flow really is about, branching, doing your coding, writing your tests like you do, right, guys? Definitely. Committing, pushing, then getting your pull request and merging, and then when you're merged, it's beer time, right? So it's a really good way to work. The tools are awesome. Dependency management in iOS sort of comes very nicely with GitHub. You get CocoaPods, obviously, Carthage, and soon SPM. There's also something I had no idea about literally until I did this, and that is you get free continuous integration testing with Travis CI. This is super awesome for all the tests that you're writing, right? Wiki, GitHub pages, Markdown and README is actually really awesome because a lot of people have trouble maintaining good docs for their code, and Markdown is really the best way to do it. There's a really cool badges system through things like Shields.io, which lets you have like dynamic, cool little widgets on your static Markdown, which is really cool. And of course, integrations with pretty much everything, so there's kind of no reason not to use it. There's an ancient Chinese proverb that goes something like, if there's a Git tree in the GitHub forest, but no one clones it, is it even on GitHub? And what that really is about is the fact that when you open source something and you put it on GitHub, you should probably make it usable. And the number one thing there really is you need a README file that is readable. So nothing like this. I've seen quite a few. If you troll Hacker News, sometimes there'll be some cool new Git repo from something, and you click it, and it's like 3 words. There's no tests. There's no information on how to install it. There's no information on anything. So no usage instructions, no tests, no version or dependency info, no syntax highlighting, no licensing. So what happens if you want to use it in that project you're working on? If it's got no license, your boss probably says you can't use it. And if there's none of these, then there's going to be no Git cloning, that's for sure. These are not the repos you're looking for. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So, of course, I just popped over to Alarmify to see what a proper README markdown looks like and how they did stuff. I've had some experience in the past with creating a CocoaPod spec, so that wasn't too much trouble. But I thought it was interesting to maybe just have a look at, how the big boys roll and learn a lot of stuff. This is kind of how a nice-looking framework structure should look. It's not actually how it currently looks because this is in a pending pull request, which is waiting for these tests to pass, which is a long story I won't get into right now, but it's not our fault, I don't think. So, firstly, sources. Put your code in a sources folder. That's sources with an S, which is strange because some people have sources without the S, but if you do go read Apple's page, it's very specific, sources with an S. Tests, the ones that you promised you'd write. And obviously you've got some package managing information, so package Swift, your pod spec, your SwiftLint, because you lint your code, right? And Travis for your CI testing, and of course git ignore because there's nothing more annoying than your personal Xcode preferences ending up in a public repo. You should try and separate stuff that you keep for your framework or your example code or whatever it is into isolated areas, so resources, fixtures, stuff like that, so that really the section that involves the actual code is just in sources and tests is separate. So try and remove all that crud. You can actually strip most of your code down to having like 2 plist files, one for test targets, one for all the other targets. I haven't actually done this. I've gotten really close, but I got busy doing something else. But I should have one finally. Unfortunately, with watchOS, you can't change the target in Xcode, so you need to, the info plist, you need to edit the Xcode project file. It's not that hard, don't be scared, just open it up in Sublime and do some find replace. And as long as you've got Git, you can always revert, right? So, supporting multiple targets. Interestingly enough, Pull Out Defaults doesn't support OSX right now because it's in a pull request again, waiting to be merged. But the point is that this is the kind of code you want to put in there. NS Color is not obviously available on UIKit, and UI Color is not available on AppKit, but people want to use defaults on both, so we should test them, and we should also make sure that our code looks like that. So it's important that when you support multiple targets, that you create a target for each platform. At the moment, really you want to go for iOS, macOS, tvOS, well, they're probably going to call it macOS, right? And watchOS. Unfortunately, you can't do tests for watchOS yet, but I guess that's coming. And write your tests with platforms in mind, So we did a test here for the integer boundaries, which seems like silly, right? Because surely, Apple's already tested. But hey, we might have found a problem with NS user defaults, so to be sure. In this case, I'm wanting to make sure that the 64-bit stuff works, but it's not going to run on the iPhone 4. So you need that little flag in there, and that's important. And also on the watch, when the watch is actually available for testing. Put that stuff into your Travis file so you can have like your Apple TV destination actually run on Travis, which is super cool. And it's really not that hard. I mean, take a look at ours, take a look at Alarmify. It's going to take you a couple of hours. So some cool things that I stole or learnt from other GitHub repos. The Travis file for Xcode testing. These little shield badges. You can center your logo with HTML in Markdown. I googled it, I found it works, all right? Don't hate me. And also, there's these cool little checkboxes, which I literally have never seen until I checked out Alarmify, and they're super awesome. And something that blew my mind, I've been using the triple backtick in Slack for a long time to do kind of like that monospaced font code escaping. I had no idea you can just put like the name of the programming language in the first line, and it highlights it that way. So if you're not doing triple backtick Swift, try it, it's amazing. Travis files. All right, so this cool guy. Unfortunately, you have to write language Objective-C, which is the only part in this repo that actually mentions it, which makes me feel a little bit sick in the stomach, but it's all good because it's actually still Swift. Maybe that'll change soon, but it doesn't matter. There's an install script here for SwiftLint because it doesn't come on the boxes by default. And this is cool because you can actually install anything you want, I guess, within reason, but it's Linux. And then you have your kind of this has been cut down for the slide, but you have your schemes. It's really important that your schemes in the Travis file match the exact string names in your Xcode project, or it won't find them, but this is how it's able to load them and launch them. We've got a list of things that will execute. So SwiftLint, I want that to run. By default, it's set up. We've got a SwiftLint file that ignores a few things because, hey, it's a little bit anal SwiftLint, but if it comes across something that it considers to be critical error, it'll return an error code and then the build will fail. So that's cool. And the important thing about this is we're basically providing something on the open source platform. So if someone forks or creates like a pull request, then our rules will apply as well. If they push and the pull request fails because their linting is awful, then I don't need to tell them because they can see it themselves. So that's really handy. Make sure that you run this yourself though locally. So what you'll kind of see in Xcode is something like this. You basically have all your kind of framework targets. They're the ones that get compiled that end up into like a sort of a framework file that you can import into another project, and then a test for each one, obviously minus WatchKit at the moment, or WatchOS. And what you want to do is make sure to run that Xcode build command locally first. My first push failed, and then I was like, great, now I've got to fix it and push it again, and it's all public. So just run that Xcode build locally first, and it should run. If it doesn't run, then it's not going to run on Travis either. Make sure that your shell files are chmod +x. So I found that cool SwiftLint install script somewhere. Some Australian guy from Brisbane actually did it, and he was like, yeah, dude, you didn't make your file executable. And I was like, I didn't realize the permissions were actually part of Git, like they're tracked that way, but sure enough, they were. So name your targets correctly, because if they're not named correctly, they won't work. You should probably use something like SwiftLint. It's super cool. And don't output weird characters like that. That is actually UTF-8, but that kind of stuff might have something to do with, we don't know what's going on with this test problem, but it definitely breaks XC Pretty, which claims to be UTF-8 compatible, but it's not. There's some weird stuff going on. So, I don't know, just silence weird outputs like that. That's what you get when it passes. That's Russian up there, Poyachali, and it's what Yuri Gagavny said when he launched into space, because all tests were good. And I guess if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for this kind of situation. A green build means you can merge and everything's good. And it's really cool. You can click around there, see heaps of information, rerun the tests when they fail, because sometimes they do. And it's just, check out Travis CI. I've never used it before. It's really cool. Of course, you want to add Carthage, because we all know Carthage is probably the best way you should be handling that kind of stuff. But it's super easy. You just need to share the targets. So you go into that little manage thing that I was showing you before. And there's one more step. And you need to make sure that you name your product name the same for all the targets. And the reason why is when Carthage builds them, it will use that name. And if you have 4 different framework names, it's super annoying. You have to import different names for different platforms. And so the optimal solution is that people can just say import Palau, and then depending on where they import their code, it'll work, because it might run on tvOS, it might run on iOS, it might run on Watch, maybe even on OS X or Mac OS. CocoaPods, someone requested it hours after we released it, and I was like, yeah, cool, okay, why not? More is good. And actually, this is not up to date anymore, so they released version 1 last week. I have not had time to look at it. It hasn't really changed much. They just made it more consistent. They said basically that the pod spec before was very easy to screw up, and it's better now, but this works. The idea here though is versioning is important. It should match the one that you have in your info peer list, the one info peer list that you have. And here you can specify the deployment target versions. And if you're making an open source framework, you should try and keep that version as low as possible so that everyone can use it on as many projects as possible. And NS user defaults, I don't think it's changed for any of the versions. We're just going back to the kind of where Swift is compatible in the earliest versions of those platforms. Test it locally. You can actually pop in a local path in your pod spec if you didn't know that. And what that means is that you've got one folder with your cool, crazy GitHub library that's CocoaPod spec compatible, and you have your example app, which you're using to import your own thing to make sure it works before you unleash it on the internet. And you can just do it, pod install, and if it works, it works. Don't forget to bump your versions. Super easy mistake to do. And the reason why is because you kind of have this dependency where you sort of need to make sure that it works, and then you need to commit it, and then you need to push it, and then you wait for Travis to say that it's finished, and then you can tag it, push it, and pod trunk it. And you don't want to be pushing versions with new versions incremented if they're not actually correct yet. So just take a bit of time to think about it. Make sure you lint it as well, and it'll make sure you won't have less pain when you're wondering why it doesn't work. So the cool thing about CocoaPods is they give us a bunch of stuff for free, and one of those is a bit of advice on how to make a good repo. And these rules kind of apply to anything. Some of the points are specific to iOS, obviously, but they're saying, 10 points for supporting Swift Package Manager. Well, it's not entirely true. We put our files in the sources folder. We have a package.swift file, but I actually thought I would jump in swift-env and launch up Swift 3, and of course it doesn't work because our code isn't Swift 3 compliant and the package manager doesn't even work. And so, that's kind of a lie, but we're ready, and we're waiting for when it comes out to make it fully supported. Having a great README, that's nice of you, CocoaPods, thanks for the compliment. Built-in Swift, yep, we're Swift, and of course we're past version 1, which is super easy when you find bugs in your own stuff straight away and push it 3 times. So if you want to just cheat, maybe you could just release version 1.03 straight away. Oh, lag, no. There we go. SPM, it's coming. So, have a read on the page, put your files in the sources folder, have a package Swift file, try and have nothing in there but Swift files, and you'll be in less pain when it comes. It's going to be super exciting, but for now there isn't really much to say because I guess it's going to change. That's our file, so you can see how useful that is, really. But I guess later that might be as simple as what a simple SPM package might be, to simply say, this is the name of the package, the files are in the sources folder, it'll compile, and you can import it. Cool badges. These are really cool. I had no idea that, when I saw those things on GitHub, that's what they were. I just thought, oh, that's cool. But actually, these guys, and there's a few others, have come up with this awesome way that, you provide a URL, and that obviously is programmatical, and you can dynamically generate these things. So Travis supports it, and what you can have is that URL is just Cementos/Palau, which is our public repo. And because we're on Travis CI, we say !branch equals master, and it will always show what the master branch is currently building. Of course, it should be passing. I made a slight mistake before and I didn't have the branch specified, and so it was showing the newest broken build and panicked. I was like, oh no, why is it broken? But it wasn't. So just make sure you put that master branch in your Travis CI badge. There's a couple other cool ones. CocoaPods gives you the version, they give you the platforms that you support. You can make your own, like pure Swift, that looks cool. And of course Twitter, so it's pretty cool way of jazzing up your page. So if you liked what you saw, and perhaps, if you've played around with this already or you haven't, then maybe jump on there and just give it a little star. I don't mind waiting, so now's a good time. Just joking. Anyway, so thanks for that, and it's my first time, but it was good. And if anyone has any questions, fire away. Nope. All right, cool. I think there's a break coming up, but these guys are pretty healthy, so it's not going to be pizza. So that assert fails.